We're so pleased to have Avi Goldfarb here today. He was just reminding us that the last seminar he gave was in advance of his best-selling book, Prediction Machines. Avi's the Rotman Chair in AI and Healthcare and Professor of Marketing at the Rotman School at Toronto. Spends time with the Creative Destruction Lab and BER, amongst other things, and we're very pleased to have him give us a little bit of a peek of his next book called Power and Prediction. Avi, the floor is yours. Welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks, David. It's great to be talking to this crowd. Looking forward to hearing your comments and questions. Put them in the chat as I'm speaking, and there'll be, of course, time for Q&A after. It's great to see lots of familiar names among you. So this is a summary of our next book, of our new book, Power and Prediction. And the starting point for any discussion of AI is its potential and the hype around its potential. So if you've been paying attention lately, you've seen people say things like AI is going to transform the way we do science. It's going to do diplomacy. It's going to change and create next generation consumer experiences, solve the climate crisis, and cure cancer. So maybe not. If any of those things come to pass, of course, the impact of AI on the economy and on society overall, the way we live and the way we work, will be extraordinary. And so we can imagine, trillions and trillions of dollars of value coming from this technology. Of course, if we believe any of that, then we have to think through what we're talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Many of those articles, when they discuss AI, they imagine a technology like what we see in science fiction, which is a robot that can do just about everything we can do. They might listen to us, they might not, but it is an artificial general intelligence that can do all sorts of things that normally require human intelligence, maybe to superhuman level. I don't think that idea of an AGI, of an artificial general intelligence, is crazy. There's reasons to think someday it might happen. But it's important to recognize that technology has been 20 to 50 years away since the early discussions of AI in the 1960s. And if you talk to people on the ground in AI development, it seems to still be 20 to 50 years away. So this is not the technology we're talking about today when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Technology we're talking about today, the reason we're talking about AI in 2022, and we weren't really talking about it so much in 2002, has almost nothing to do with a machine that can think like a human. Instead, it's a very particular technology, a branch of computational statistics called machine learning that's gotten much better. And so instead of artificial intelligence, in our first book, we said we can think about it as prediction machines, not AI generally that's replacing humans, but prediction technology that's making it easier to fill in missing information, using data that you have to generate data you don't have. And so around the time our last book came out, it was clear that the cost of prediction had started to fall. It was about to fall even more rapidly. And we saw all sorts of applications of prediction technology around that time and over the last 4 years. So we saw, this came out this week, we saw AI applications, for example, in the taxi industry, where a real challenge for taxi drivers is to identify where there's going to be people to pick up. The high-skilled drivers are relatively good at this. The low-skilled drivers relatively not so good at this. And so there was an AI tool that was developed and deployed in Japan that could provide predictions about where there were going to be people to pick up so that taxi drivers could get better. And this AI closed the gap between the low-skilled drivers and the best, highest-skilled drivers in terms of productivity by about 14%. A lot of the examples of AI that we've seen are like this, which is there's a particular task within a workflow, and there's a prediction tool that can make that task a little bit more productive. Even in that industry, we've seen this tool. We've seen tools around navigation that help taxi drivers get from point A to point B a little bit more efficiently, and we've seen prediction tools on figuring out which riders should match to which drivers, combined with some digital transformation to create digital dispatch. Many of those technologies were sold into the taxi industry to make that industry more efficient. We think of those as point solutions. There's already a workflow. You take a machine learning tool, you take an AI, you take a prediction machine, you drop it into the existing workflow, and you make that existing workflow a little more efficient. We don't think that's where the big potential lies. The bigger potential, rather than these point solutions that take your workflow, figure out some human process, and make it a little bit more efficient by dropping in an AI, instead, reimagine what you can do with an industry once you have better prediction. So Uber took those different technologies, predictions for how to get from one place to another in terms of driving directions, the most efficient way at a particular moment in time, predictions on where riders might be to get the drivers in the right place at the right time, digital dispatch to make it easier for riders and drivers to find each other. And rather than creating a slightly better taxi company, they realized that those technologies enable a different kind of transportation company. That is what we call a system level change. Taking the point solutions, taking the AIs and realizing, no, you can create more value to end customers by doing something entirely differently. But when we see what's happening on the ground, whether it's in manufacturing or retail or healthcare, the adoption of AI so far, this is from the 2019 census, but we haven't seen much change in other data over the past 3 years. Census takes a while to get out of the census. It's been a little underwhelming. So despite the hype and potential of the technology, and despite what really does seem like a rapid drop in the cost of prediction, right? So prediction has gotten better, faster, and cheaper. And we can see all these potentially more efficient point solutions in all sorts of places. The use of the technology remains niche. Here it's something like 5% of organizations at most that were surveyed in the census are adopting the technology. But we contrast that with the conversations we hear about the potential of AI, that it's extraordinary, that AI is the new electricity. When we wrote prediction machines, we thought there was a revolution about to happen. We were sitting in 2018 thinking, wow, we sort of imagined that curve that I just showed you. In many ways, that drop in the cost of prediction has come to pass. And yet we haven't seen it on the ground. How do we reconcile that with people who are saying AI is the new electricity? Electricity is everywhere, right? Wherever you look, you can see this extraordinary impact of electricity. Now, we think that metaphor of AI as the new electricity. It's probably much deeper than most of the people claiming AI is the new electricity really understand. Because once you know the history of electricity, you know that it was clear in the 1880s, if you are paying attention, that electricity was going to have an extraordinary impact. It was going to change the way we work and the way we live. And yet it wasn't until the 1920s that the median house and the median factory in the US were electrified. It took 40 years from recognizing the potential of the technology for it actually affecting most people in the country. Why did it take so long? Because the first applications of electricity were point solutions, and they're relatively underwhelming. So this is what a factory might have looked like in the 1880s. See, there's a shaft connecting all the machines to a central steam engine in the factory, and then all the machines are connected by belts to that shaft, to that steam engine. And you organize the factory, as Warren Devine Jr. and later Paul David pointed out, you organize the factory around the steam engine. So the most power-hungry machines were located as close to the steam engine as possible, and the less power-hungry machines were located farther away, because the further away you were from the power source, the more energy was dissipated through those shafts and belts, and the less efficient use of the energy would have. And so the factory itself was organized around the power source. And in the early days, the first applications of electricity in factories were, for some factories, they realized electricity was going to be cheaper power. And so they took out the steam engine for the center of the factory, dropped in an electric motor, and didn't really change anything else in terms of how things operate. It was a point solution, which is they dropped in the electric motor at the point where the old solution, the steam engine, was. And a handful of factories adopted it, and it created some greater energy efficiency with fewer line shafts and reduced friction losses. And so by 1900, we had something like 5% of factories adopting electricity. But then around 1900, people started to realize there was a new way to design the factory. And so they realized that electricity wasn't just cheap power, but electricity allowed you to decouple the power source from the machines in the factory. And once you decoupled the power source from the machines from the factory, once you realized that electricity wasn't just cheap power, but distributed power, that enabled you to flexibly place your machines, build much lighter construction, and create the factories that we sort of imagine of the turn of the century when we think about factories today, which is that inputs come in one end and outputs come with the other, and the workflow, the geography of the factory is organized around the workflow. So you can start with parts and you move toward a finished product with modular production and process. And that led to, around that time, as these innovations were happening, a change in the trajectory of adoption. Naively, if we just take those first 10 to 20 years and draw them out, we end up with pretty underwhelming adoption of the technology, even well into the 1950s. But once you started to have this co-invention, once you started to have these complementary innovations, that's when we started to see adoption rise. Not instantly, it still took time, but at least by 1920, half of factories had adopted, and by the 40s and 50s, almost all households and all factories were electrified. And so we have this transformation from a point solution where we just take out the old solution, drop in a new one, to a system solution, recognizing that electricity allows you to rethink, reimagine what a factory can look like. And so the question underlying this talk is, when we think about AI system solutions, are we going to have to wait 40 years? We waited 40 years for electricity to affect the median household in the median factory. We waited 40 years for computing to show up in the productivity statistics. Are we going to have to wait another 40 years for AI? Those 40 years are what we might think of as the between times. The time between you see the potential of the technology, but before that technology has come to fruition. And so what we see are these point solutions, where in AI so far, where you have a prediction and it improves some existing decision, and that decision can be taken independently of all the other decisions in the organization. But it's not an imagination story. It's not a story about reimagining what the organization can do. So, and Hugo, your question is right on my next point, which is, in some sense, yes, it was a lack of imagination, but a lack of imagination in all sorts of different directions. Because what we know from the literature on general purpose technologies is we need this positive feedback loop of innovation, where we have upstream innovation lead to downstream innovation, and that downstream innovation in turn leads to upstream. So electric power led to innovation in electric motors and electric lighting, which in turn led to innovation in electricity generation and distribution, which in turn led to innovation on home appliances and back and forth. And so that feedback loop can take time. So the literature so far on the impact of artificial intelligence in economics has been focused on point solutions. De Ron and Pasquale and others have been focused on automation generally, but even on AI in particular, to say, we have a workflow. There are tasks within that workflow. And what technology does is it enables machines to do tasks that used to be done by humans. And so the machines replace the humans, and the hope for humanity is that new tasks arise. The essence of a task-based model is focused on solving, using the technology as a point solution, and then hoping that new industries arise and new tasks arise. And there is a literature, like a massive literature and a growing literature in economics and elsewhere, that takes this task-based model as the right model to think about technology. So there's, and these papers effectively think through what are the things that humans do, and which of those things that humans do could be done by an AI, by a machine learning tool. And then they assess how many jobs are under threat because of AI. And so, Duran in this recent paper, Harms of AI, emphasizes that AI is going to replace skilled tasks, but in the short term, AI is going to replace relatively simple tasks performed by low-wage workers. It is a task-based model. And so far, he is not wrong. So far, when we look at the impact of AI and who's adopting and who's using, it is very much, in most cases, about this task-based model, where you unpack your workflow, you identify prediction tasks that are currently done by humans, and you drop it in AI and take out the human from that workflow, and then that makes that workflow a little bit more efficient. Now, at the Summer Institute, just down the street from MIT at NVR, when was it? In 2019, Tim Bresnahan came up to me and said, and I, by the way, at the time at J. Joshua, I had a recent paper focused on this task-based model in the JEP, and Tim said, Avi, I hate your AI work. I'm like, Tim, why do you hate our AI work? We're pretty proud of it, and we like it, and you're like my academic grandfather, so it felt like particularly bad. And he said, well, you have this idea that it's a task-based model, and that's not how value is created by information technology. Value is created in information technology by imagining new systems. He said, Tim, that's really interesting. Would you come to our conference, our AI conference in Toronto in September, and debate David and Pasquale on this task versus systems-based model? And Tim said, sure. And Tim, David, and Pasquale came and talked. Joshua was there as moderator. And I don't think Tim convinced anybody. You can watch the video if you want. It's still up on YouTube. So David and Pasquale were pretty convincing that so far, when we've seen the impact of these technologies, it's been very much on the task-based side. But Tim got Joshua, Ajay, and I intrigued in thinking through, what does this system-based approach mean, and how can we sort of reimagine innovation processes and reimagine the impact of AI to be at a systems level? And Tim came out swinging. He said, tasks, these point solutions that everybody's emphasizing, play no role in how technology, IT systems create value. And Tim's thought about this for a while. So his original paper with Manuel Trachtenberg on general purpose technologies emphasized that there's a handful of technologies that have an outsized impact on growth. And the essence of how these technologies have an impact on growth is not about a one-time increase in total factor productivity. So like, if you remember your solo growth model from first year macro, in the long run, in the standard macro model, there's no growth because capital and labor end up being efficient and total factor productivity is fixed. And so growth comes from increases in total factor productivity in the standard solo growth model. If you have a one-time improvement in technology, that's a one-time improvement in total factor productivity, you would eventually go back to zero growth. What the essence of the GPT paper is some technologies enable a positive feedback loop in total factor productivity because the upstream innovation generates downstream innovation, which in turn generates upstream innovation and back and forth. And so it's this positive feedback loop that generates outsized growth that we saw from the steam engine and electrification in the computer. So Eric Brynjolfsson, Daniel Rock, and Chet Syverson a couple of years ago said, well, what's going on in AI? Is AI another general purpose technology? It seems like we have, we can see the potential of AI. There are some early concrete signs of the technology's promise, particularly through recent leaps in AI, performance being the most prominent example, but there hasn't been the impact in the data. Productivity growth is slow. And they argue, consistent with the Bresnahan and Trachtenberg story, consistent with the example of Uber that I gave at the beginning, which is to get outsized growth, you need a kind of restructure. You need to reimagine what that technology can do for industry. So the question in our book that's coming out 2 weeks today is, what's this kind of restructuring? So once we establish that the biggest impact of technological change is not just about taking out some human process and dropping in a machine, that is necessarily going to be incremental, but figuring out a new way to deliver value. What does that new way to deliver value look like? To understand that, you need to think through two things about AI. The first point is today's AI is prediction technology. And predictions are useful because they help you make better decisions. Why does that matter? Well, because decisions aren't independent of each other. So a system solution is going to require coordination between multiple decisions and not just about making one particular decision a little bit better by dropping a prediction. And so AI disrupts by separating the prediction, the human prediction, into a machine prediction. And so it separates the human prediction from human judgment. Right now, when you make a decision, the prediction and judgment are bundled together in your head. But there's this opportunity through machine prediction to unbundle. For example, I'm sure if you know this movie, I, Robot. It's an okay movie. But it has this amazing flashback scene. Okay, so Will Smith is the protagonist in I, Robot, and he hates robots. And so and there's this flashback scene about why he hates robots. And it's there's this Will Smith and this little girl are driving and they're in a car accident, and their cars go into a river, and it's pretty clear that they're both about to drown. And then a robot comes along and saves him and not the girl, and that's why he hates robots. Because it was a machine, he could audit it. And he found out that the robot predicted that he had a 45% chance of survival, and the girl had an 11% chance to survive. And the robot saved him and not the girl because 45 is more than 11. And then Will Smith said, but 11% was more than enough, and a human being would have known that. Well, that's about the relative value of, in this case, different people's lives. That's, I'm not sure we all agree that an adult man's life is worth less than a quarter of a girl's life. But that's a statement about judgment. But once you have that 45 and 11, once you have the percentages given about the likelihood of saving, we then have to impose some, we then have to do the hard task of assigning value to those two things. We have the AI prediction, and we can think through what the human judgment is. So how does this unpacking work in a little bit more in reality? I don't know if you remember this headline from a few years ago: Amazon automatically tracks and fires warehouse workers for productivity. Okay, there was lots of reasons why this narrative didn't actually happen at Amazon. But even if it did, even if there was a company that had a bunch of warehouses in the US, and here's how the story went. They had a prediction tool that measured the performance of the workers on a day-to-day basis. And if the performance of the worker based on that prediction tool dropped below some level, then the story went that those workers would receive an email that said, you're fired. Okay, not what happened. So just want to be clear. But even if that was what happened, the narrative that came out of that it's time to stop worrying that robots will take our jobs and start worrying that they'll decide who gets jobs, is just wrong. What happened, what it means to create a prediction tool that then creates an automatic email about whether you have your job or not is not a statement about the machine making a decision. It's a statement about a power grab from headquarters away from the warehouse managers. By creating a prediction tool on the effectiveness of each individual worker based on some measurement that somebody at headquarters thinks is the core measurement of what should happen in a warehouse, they've taken power away from the individual managers of the warehouse who would make those HR decisions and given it to somebody at headquarters who's in a different location and maybe even at a different time to scale their ability to control the workforce at the whole company. So it's this decoupling that creates a change in power. In that case, it reinforces the existing power structure and makes the centralization, the central even more powerful than it was before. It doesn't have to work that way. Sometimes it can disrupt existing power structures. So lead is a deadly neurotoxin, and you do not want it in your drinking water. And a few years ago, it became clear that in Flint, Michigan, there was a lot of lead pipes and a lot of people were drinking toxic water. And so the city received funds to start digging up lead pipes and replacing them with safe pipes. So the process worked that in order to figure out for sure if a pipe was lead, you actually had to dig it up. And by that time, it was pretty easy to replace. So a lot of the cost was just in finding whether a pipe was lead. And so two professors at the University of Michigan built an AI tool to predict which houses likely had lead pipes. And the city used their tool. And compared to a city level baseline of 15 to 20% likely having lead, their tool was working really well. And 4 out of 5 houses that they predicted would have lead pipes actually had lead pipes. And so it seemed like a very, an excellent story of here's a point solution of how AI can make things more efficient and really help people. But that point solution created some resistance. And the resistance came from people whose pipes weren't getting dug up. They'd say things like, hey, how come my neighbor's pipes are getting dug up, but not mine? How come those people down the street, their whole street's getting dug up? That's not fair. And they complain to their politicians. And the politicians say, you're right, that's not fair. We should do this systematically, street by street. Perhaps even starting with the streets in my ward. And so we ended up with entire neighborhoods where they dug up all the pipes, and they were almost all copper. So you can see where there's blue in the graph. That's when they dug up a pipe and it was copper, not lead. The AI provided an excellent prediction. The judgment remained political, and the politicians said, you know what, I don't really care where the lead actually is. I want to do this in a different way. I want to do it my way. But because of that decoupling, because we could see the 80%, and then after they stopped using those predictions, the success rate dropped to less than 20%. After that change, it was clear what the wrong decision was. And because it was clear that using the AI was much more successful and helped many more people avoid drinking toxic water, that it became untenable. And despite the political will to ignore the AIs and dig neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, a judge came along and said, no, you have to follow the prediction. Once we've decoupled the prediction from the human decision, we can see how off those politicians' judgment was. And then the city was eventually forced to use those predictions. It changed power from the politicians and moved it, in this case, to the courts. The tool was implemented back again, and the success rate went up to about 70%. And that technology, they turned it into a company, Blue Conduit, that last year was named one of the best inventions of the year. It's now in hundreds of cities around the world. So this is a process of envisioning new systems, right? So we can think through how AI disrupts by, through the decoupling of prediction and judgment, it can create who has power. And through the need for coordinated decision-making, it can create challenges for implementation. How do we get from there to envisaging a new way to do things? And this gets right at Tom's point, which is, his case studies on working with AI, that it's the entire spectrum of workers. But those case studies, at least from my quick glance at it so far, Tom, haven't dug in deeply yet. A lot of them are point solutions. A lot of them are thinking through a workflow and figuring out a way that that AI can make the existing workflow more efficient. Whether that's about high-level knowledge workers or low-skilled workers, or about automation or augmentation. When we think about new systems, we can start to imagine various ways to do things differently. So imagine, let's talk about healthcare. So there's a lot of excitement about AI in healthcare. Some of it focused on the opportunity, like Eric Topol's book, Deep Medicine. Some of it more focused on the dark side, like the New Yorker article, AI versus MD, that came out a few years ago, or the New York Times is focused on the dark side of AI in healthcare. Oh, great, Tom. Okay, you agree. So now we're gonna get to reimagining how we can do all these systems processes. Okay, we're gonna think about it in healthcare. So partly related to that excitement, we this year at the NBR AI conference, we focused day 2 on healthcare, and we heard from economists and from a lot of practitioners, machine learning, who do machine learning and who work in healthcare, on these various AI tools that in the academic literature seem to be much better than human. So whether it was they were diagnosing better than human, or they were providing some treatment better than human, or they were enabling some operational workflow better than human, whatever it might be, that there seemed to be this suite of AI tools that were very likely to be better than human. And yet, when you looked at the data, there's very little adoption of AI in healthcare, as we pointed out in the census data, and same thing shows up in burning glass data. So the core theme of this conference that we heard was the potential for AI in healthcare is extraordinary, and the economic impact might happen, but because so far the tools seem incremental. Yeah, we can make the radiologist a little bit better. Yeah, we can allocate staff a little bit more efficiently, or we can make slightly fewer mistakes in triage. That the incentive to adopt by those hospitals is pretty mediocre. So here's an example of one of these tools. So Sendable Anfanzi at Obermeyer built a machine learning tool for triage in hospitals. In particular, there's people arrive at the emergency department and there's some risk they're having a heart attack. Physicians have to decide whether to test those. So it's not the first level of triage, but the next one. Physicians have to decide what to do with those patients. And so they've got to predict effectively whether those people are having a heart attack. And what they built in this paper was a machine learning tool that did better than doctors, about 50% better than physicians in predicting whether somebody was having a heart attack. Okay. And so 50% better, that's pretty extraordinary. But the paper wasn't about, oh, wow, or 50% better than human. It was about, ultimately, it was about why humans make mistakes. It was a behavioral economics paper about the kinds of errors that humans make relative to what we might be able to do if we focused on machines. But that paper has an online appendix. And in that online appendix, there is an online appendix 3. And online appendix 3, they didn't dare to do this as the core of the paper, but online appendix 3 is about a taste of a system change, which is once your AI is good enough, can you change the workflow of your emergency department? And Jay, Joshua, and I dug into this paper, took their counterfactual probably a lot more seriously than Sendel and Ziad would have wanted us to, and tried to think through, what does this look like as the AI gets better and better and better and better? So here's the current process. Patient comes into the emergency department, seems like you're having a heart attack. There's some, if the doctor then says, oh yeah, it seems like you are having a heart attack, it's not indigestion, they'll then send the person off for what's called stress testing. And this is where you go on a treadmill and they wire you up and they measure what happens as they put your body under a little bit of stress. And then based on those measurements, if they still think you're having a heart attack, then they send you to what's called catheterization, where they, which is surgery. And in the process of that surgery, they can determine definitively if you're having a heart attack. And if you are, they can then add the treatment as part of the surgery, which is to put in a stent. So, in medicine, if you sort of think about your health econ textbook, there's 2 core decision makers. There's medicine and there's administration. The medical side, the doctors decide what to do on a patient by patient basis. So there's a patient presented, and they have to decide, in this case, whether to send the patient home, whether to give them a stress test, or potentially to send them straight to catheterization. The test is just to gather more information, right? Send them straight to surgery. There's an administrator who decides on the resources to allocate. And they, again, think through these three decisions. At the current level of AI accuracy, as I said, if you take the numbers in their paper and a few other places probably a little too seriously, you get that the doctor wants to send the stress test first. The administrator wants to do the stress test first. In both cases, the uncertainty at 15%, which is where the AI is today, or where the doctor accuracy is today, you want to stress test first on a patient-by-patient basis to learn more, and it's worth it for the administrator to have the stress test available in the hospital because the benefit of overcoming that uncertainty is bigger than the opportunity cost of allocating those resources to someone else. Now, if the AI is perfect or near perfect, then both the doctors and the administrators agree. What do they agree on? Well, if we're almost sure that somebody is having a heart attack, let's send them straight to surgery. There's no reason to do that testing first. The testing is risky, it's costly, it takes time. Just send them straight to surgery and solve the problem. Okay. Where it gets complicated is in the middle. If there's a point where on a patient-by-patient basis, the doctor might want to offer a stress test. But from the point of view of resources in the entire hospital, the administration might say, no, we want to send direct to catheterization or send patients home. We don't want to even offer the stress test. That might be because the stress test is costly and it would be more profitable not to offer it. It might be because the opportunity cost of offering the stress test in the emergency department means that there's space dedicated to stress testing that could be better used elsewhere. So you can think about it as administration. It depends on your view of hospital administration, whether it's cynical or not. But there's reasons for the medical decision on a patient-by-patient basis and the administrative decision on resource allocation to disagree. And when that happens, we don't have good systems in place to think through, well, should the administration just stop offering stress tests? Well, those kinds of decision rights haven't really been figured out. Because if they did, then surely doctors would protest and patients would protest enough. And so in order to get to this world, as the predictions get better and better and better, where we can do our emergency department differently, we got to think through what's the purpose, what's the mission of the emergency department. So here's University of Pittsburgh Medical Center has their emergency medicine department mission on their website. It's pretty clean: to improve the outcomes of acutely ill and injured patients through high quality, cost efficient care. Okay. So if we're going to thinking through, well, at 50% accurate, how does that all play out? Well, now we have to figure out who has decision rights. Is it the doctor or administration? And how do we allocate those decision rights? So we need to redesign how that plays out. We probably need to change the regulation, because there's a regulatory process around what happens, and that regulatory process needs to change. We might actually need to rethink how we actually do medicine. So not just in terms of how we license the doctors and what we allow them to do, but to, once more patients are going straight to catheterization, does that mean we need to change the processes that we use in catheterization? And finally, so this is just a step toward, okay, we have better prediction coming into the emergency department. That allows us to change the workflow in the emergency department and make it more effective and efficient to reorganize who does what. But we can imagine this at scale. We can imagine that this, these tools are going to make the predictions much, much more effective. Or sorry, these tools are going to occur at diagnosis of all aspects of triage. And right now we think of that happening at the door of the emergency department, but there's no reason it couldn't happen the moment you call 911. Okay, so imagine a system where you call 911, and because of the sensors you might be wearing on your body or that might be in your house or the information that's available, that generates a prediction about what's wrong with you. And that prediction about what's wrong with you first reduces the redundancy of sending an ambulance, a fire truck, and a police car every time you call 911. But more, it could even lead to sending the right kind of ambulance. So if the prediction is accurate enough that, oh, this person's having a heart attack, then you send a paramedic and an ambulance with expertise and equipment dedicated to cardiac issues. Or if the prediction is this person is injured, you send people with the expertise and the ambulance focused on injury. Now, that's a long way away. A whole bunch of things have to happen. First of all, we have to have regulatory changes around the use of data. We have to have those sensors in our houses. We have to build better prediction technologies. They're not there yet. And we have to change the way we train paramedics. And we have to change the way we resource ambulances. So now we can start thinking about why it might be 40 years. And it's not just reimagining, but it's about resource allocation, to Hugo's question way earlier. So in any industry, in any company, you can go through this process, thinking through what's our mission, what are the core decisions underlying our mission. In medicine, you can think about it as treatment and resource allocation. How might better prediction lead to either or both of those decisions getting better? And how do we enable coordination in order to really get that value? So we can move from the point solutions where we drop in an AI to an existing process to reimagining the way the company operates. Thanks very much. It is time for questions. And Laura, perfect timing. I got yours. So I'm gonna stop share and answer Laura's question. So how do you think low adoption is due to AI being perceived as just incremental progress versus people being adverse to leaving decisions to an AI? So an agency and trust. Okay, and trust-based context like healthcare. So I think there's two parts to the answer. The first one is, I think part of the system level change in many industries, including healthcare, is figuring out the source of that aversion and overcoming it with new processes. So when you get in an elevator, Laura, today, you don't really think about the fact that the elevator is taking you way up in the sky, and that if that technology didn't work, it would be deadly. You just get in the elevator, right? But in the early days of the diffusion of elevators, there were all sorts of tools and processes about creating trust. So some of them were engineering solutions, and some of them were regulatory. And so like even today, when you get in an elevator, there's a certificate in that elevator from an inspection so that you can effectively create society level trust that you can get into this machine that's going to take it way up into the sky and it's not going to fall. So part of the co-invention, part of the system level change is around this trust. Okay, so then to Hugo. Tom, I'll get to yours, but Hugo's building on Laura, so I love it. Okay, so where have we seen
Hugo can unmute himself and ask the question out loud, just so everyone.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, good idea. Thanks. Hugo, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is Hugo. So to Laura's question, and I put it in the chat, is it even deeper that it's much more a human? I don't want to be replaced. I have expertise. I don't want to be. I don't want to be useless. That AI is going to replace me. I don't want that. Is it that simple, or is that a component of it, you think?
I don't think the blacksmiths want to be replaced either. I don't think the Luddites want to be replaced either. I think this is a technological change. When technological change comes along and it changes the jobs and creates opportunities for some and challenges for others, no one wants to be replaced. And so the thing that's distinct in this particular example is right now, in the way many hospitals are run, the decision makers are the people who would be replacing themselves. That when that happens, in many industries, that's an opportunity for entrepreneurial disruption. So when the incumbents aren't willing to replace themselves and to create a new product that delivers better value to their end customers, we have startups come in and do that for them. In healthcare, it's challenging because entry is tricky and it's highly regulated. But in other industries, this resistance because you don't want a machine replacing you. I don't think we wanted a machine. There's all sorts of contexts over the past 200 years plus where workers didn't want machines replacing them, and yet the machines end up diffusing and being used. So I don't think there's anything distinct here. There's something distinct about the metaphor that we're calling it artificial intelligence, but in terms of the actual technology, not so much. So if the incumbents are resisting the change, you go, and this is to Laura's question too, this is an opportunity for entrepreneurs to figure out a new way to create value. Does that answer your question? Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. Tom, do you want to unmute? Guess not. Oh, there you are.
Yes. So, we back in the 90s, I guess we had this idea of business process reengineering that would, involve radical change in how work was done with the use of technology. And I thought it was a great idea. I wrote, I think the first article and the first book on it by a short period, not the best-selling ones in either case, but organizations had a tough time doing that, and it sort of devolved over time. And I wonder if that's what's going on with AI. People are reluctant. It's really hard to do that really broad-scale systemic change. And early moonshots with AI, like the MD Anderson Watson cancer treatment thing, didn't work out terribly well. So
Absolutely.
What do you think about those?
So, I think there's 2 points there. One is it's really hard and there's going to be lots of failure. And two is sort of the mapping to business process reengineering. So you would know better than me, but I believe there are a handful of reasons why business process engineering was largely a failure. Some of them, but you dig into it in your end, it devolved into mindless head cutting, which is, which almost means it devolved into, let's figure out the tasks that we can, get the machines or the technology to replace what humans are doing. And that's, I think I think that's exactly not the way to approach it. Think about how you deliver value, and then, and then there's reasons to think, as Hugo's built on what you had to say, disruption, entrepreneurship, the reason why the entrepreneurs have to do it. But so the first is, focus on delivering value as opposed to reducing cost. But the second is, look, so I showed you the factory in 1880 and then the factory in 1920. And we know what the winner looked like. What we forget about is there were probably dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs who tried different kinds of factories to take advantage of electricity that failed. Because from the point of view of today, we can, it's clear what the, how we could take advantage of electricity in order to create a better factory. But from the point of view of 1890, it wasn't clear. And so we had all these entrepreneurial experiments, and some succeeded and some failed. And if you're a large organization, that's a very scary bet. If you're a startup, at least you're fine. The people, maybe not you as the CEO of the startup, but the people financing you recognize that there's going to be some winners and losers. And so they're willing to take relatively high risk bets on, hey, this might work and it might be disruptive, but it might fail. And so part of the challenge here is, before we know what the successful organization that takes advantage of this technology looks like, there's lots of reasons why established organizations are going to be hesitant to do it. I think actually, Tom, I think that's something that you've written about elsewhere. So to channel your idea. Okay.
Yeah, I actually have a book coming out. I think it's in the HBR press warehouse now, delayed a little bit because they didn't want it to conflict with the other book, but it's about legacy companies that are, quote, all in on AI. And there are some, but there aren't very many. You really do have to have very visionary leaders and be willing to spend a lot of money and to take some risk.
Absolutely. And have some sense that if they don't do it, then there won't be much of a legacy anyway.
Yeah, when the leaders, I think, of these companies know they're not competing with other legacy companies. They're competing with digital native firms.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
I actually had a quick question,
Yeah.
Avi. Thanks. It's a really interesting book, or it sounds like it'll be a really interesting book. But it seems like one part of this, seems like one important part of this decoupling is that humans will be increasingly exposed to AI predictions that they'll have to combine maybe with their own information to make decisions. So I'm curious if you have thoughts about, are humans just Bayesians incorporating information optimally? Are they strategic in how they're incorporating information? And like, what should designers of these systems keep in mind when they're providing agents with this information?
I think the first thing to recognize is this is not natural in terms of human decision making. For most humans, it's not natural to take a prediction and then figure out what the payoffs are, like we do in a decision tree, and then decide what to do. Okay? There's a handful of economists who that comes very naturally to, but for the rest of the world, not so much. And so when we think about designing systems around this, a big part of human-computer interaction, user interface design is going to be how do we communicate a prediction to people who aren't really natural Bayesian updaters. So I have this this paper on opportunities for AI in refugee decision making. Okay, and so right now so if you think about refugee law under the UN Convention is clearly a wrong mistake. What do I mean by that? Sending someone back to where they came from, where they're likely to be tortured and killed, is a lot worse than accepting a refugee who's not a legitimate refugee. So there's clearly a wrong mistake. If you talk to the human adjudicators in these cases, they're very, very confident that when they say somebody is a legitimate refugee, that they really are, and that they say somebody is not telling the truth and is not a legitimate refugee, that they're not. But objectively, this is somebody else's research. This is a woman named Hillary Evans Cameron, who ended up being my co-author of this paper. Objectively, there's no way they can be that certain. Think about it, like there's no way to learn when they make mistakes, because if they accept a refugee, they don't know what would have happened had they gone back. And even if they refuse a refugee, they typically get no feedback on whether that was the right call or not. There's no real way to know, but they're extraordinarily confident. Okay. And so our idea is to build in a prediction tool that gives the refugee adjudicators a sense of whether these the claimants are telling the truth. And the key insight there is because it's a prediction machine, in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, what the machine would tell you is we have no idea if this person's telling the truth. Now, conceptually, by optimal decision making, like the way we should make decisions there, is that means we should be accepting a lot more refugees, because if we have no idea and there's a wrong mistake, we should accept a lot more people. But how do you communicate that level of uncertainty to somebody who's never been trained in stats? And like that's an open question, which is that if we're going to build this kind of a system in order to deliver much more on the law as defined in the UN Convention, we actually need to think through what the interface is that allows these adjudicators to recognize how little they know. And so that's an innovation that hasn't happened yet. So we talk about like systems level change in the co-invention. That's co-invention that people are working on in human-computer interaction departments. How do we communicate uncertainty? But I don't think we figured it out yet. I think that's an excellent challenge. It's going to be context by context. So communicating the uncertainty to a refugee adjudicator is going to be very different than needing to communicate uncertainty to somebody who's getting a recommendation from Amazon on what they're going to buy. Like the stakes are different, and the way to communicate it. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, and if anyone else has questions, feel free to
We got one
unmute
from
yourself.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Jeffrey. Even though you look like you're unmuted. No, I still can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to read it from the chat because I can't hear you. Which is, what types of domains of AI predictions might lead to systemic changes on the scale of electricity? So that's the big question. So this technology is prediction technology. Prediction allows you to make better decisions. Okay, so these changes that we anticipate are going to be much more about rather than reorganizing workflows, like you might think of in the electricity context, but around coordinated decision making. And so, thinking through how one part of the organization is going to affect another. Now, you can go through industry by industry and company by company, but there the starting point is think through their mission, think through what you're trying to accomplish, and are you really delivering on your mission? And if you're not, how much of that is because of uncertainty? So the example I love is the airport. Think about airports. There's billions of dollars that are dedicated to restaurants and shopping and an infrastructure and architecture of the airport that has nothing to do with the mission of ensuring smooth air transportation. It's all there because people are stuck at the airport for a long period of time, and to deal with the fact that the airport has not delivered on ensuring smooth air transportation. So if you knew how long it would take to get to the airport through security, you just walk on the plane, right? If you're flying private, apparently, those airports are pretty Spartan because you don't spend any time at the private airport. You just get right on the plane. And so you can imagine, okay, think through your mission. In which ways do you have this architecture, these standard operating procedures that actually are not about delivering on your mission, but compensating for the fact that you fail? We're just about out of time, but Hugo's question is really easy. As they're reading us around this topic in addition to my books. So at NBR, we run an Economics of AI conference. And so if you go to NBR conferences, Economics of AI, you can see over the past 6 years what people have been writing, and at least the ones we've accepted on AI. We also have a conference volume from our very first conference that set the agenda in AI that looks like this, and that you can get either from NBR or from University of Chicago Press. So, and all those papers are available online, so you don't actually have to buy the book at NBR Working Papers. I think that's out of time.
About at time. But yeah, if we could just thank Avi. And next week, I just want to remind everyone we have an exciting presentation by Hannah Halliburta of NYU Stern. So thank you, Avi. That was a fantastic talk.
Okay. Oh, thanks very much. Take care, everybody. It was great to see some familiar faces. Bye.
Bye.
Great questions.
Yeah, that was a nice discussion.
Okay.
I'm glad we had some time.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity. And Alex, I guess I'll see you soon enough.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.